Today's episode of the Island Archives podcast is brought to you by Old Road Rum. Old Road Rum is driven by a desire to celebrate the cultural history of St. Kitts and Nevis and is tropically aged for 12 years to present the pure expression of a well-crafted rum.
Today's episode of the Island Archive podcast brings us to an enigmatic icon who shook the region with words and actions. Dr. Walter Rodney was born in Guyana in 1942. He attended Queen's College, the top male high school in Guyana, and graduated top of his class, securing a scholarship to the University of the West Indies, where he then graduated with first-class honors in history in 1963. Becoming quite the prodigy, Rodney attended the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where he received his PhD at the tender age of 24. He was in many ways a transcendent scholar who had interest in activism, taking inspiration from the Black Power movement in the USA. He challenged the whitewash frameworks that existed of analyzing the history of oppressed peoples. He became a major player in the emergence of Pan-African consciousness and became a major inspiration to the Rastafarian movement. As a professor at Mona, he was brazen and outspoken against the government of that era, objecting strongly to their socio-economic policies. So get this, he was such a gifted and compelling orator that after undertaking an anti-capitalist activist campaign, he was banned from Jamaica by Prime Minister Hugh Shearer while attending the 1968 Black Writers' Conference in Canada. Yes, you heard right. They waited until he left and banned him from returning, as his speeches were thought to have inspired a series of riots in the late 1960s, causing death and millions in damage. In case you haven't noticed by now, this was a pretty influential dude. These are now known as the Rodney riots. After living in Tanzania for a few years, Rodney moved back to Guyana in 1974, having secured a position as a professor of the University of Guyana, but the Forbes-Burnham-led government rescinded the offer and blocked his appointment. He then founded the Working People's Alliance to serve as credible opposition to Burnham's party that was in control of the government at that time, the People's National Congress. He was arrested in 1979 and charged with arson after 2 government offices were burned, but the government was forced to drop all charges due to a lack of evidence and intense scrutiny from the international press. Pressure continued to mount as 2 party members were mysteriously killed, and the government denied Rodney and others permission to travel. Sounds fishy, right? In spite of these restrictions, he continued his tremendous work. But in a tragic turn of events, in 1980, Rodney was assassinated by a car bomb. He was only 38 years old. Dr. Walter Rodney's submissions into the socio-economic and political ether of Caribbean history will live on for generations, and his life exemplified his famous quote, "If there's to be any proving of our humanity, it must be by revolutionary means."
The Island Archive podcast is a Pelican Media Group production and is brought to you by Old Road Rum. To hear more, log on to www.islandarchive.com or check us out on all streaming platforms.